upon us nothing that was listed as the Wilton's Farm Cemetery. Well, we must have gone back times. There's 6 or 8 stones. We copied the information off. We took a prod and we searched the little hillside, and we never did find it, so we thought times were gone. But finally, one day, I could see, what did I talk with? I had to write this down because there's so many things that are going on with these. Blanche Appleby. Somebody gave me her name. I think it was Ruth. And I called her up, and she said in 1940 she went climbing through somebody's back pasture, and at the bottom of their garden they found a Revolutionary War soldier stone, some around Walker Hill in Wilton, off the Eastwood. Well, we went over there one day and just thought we'd try to search, and we found every house. Finally, I got to this house, and a whole bunch of hunters sitting around me, just where it was. We drove right to it. And at the end of the contacts, there's some stone. And I had been searching like 6 months, and I was so happy I was running across the field, yelling, I found it. And I'm sure inside the house that was terrific. But this stone had been nearly destroyed, and the DAR had put a government stone out with his service listed on it.
Was there another soldier out there that one?
No, just one. There is, however, a very nice little stone that just looks like a hedge against cemetery stone. It's just propped up against the wall, like it had split just, it really wasn't slate, but it's, I really question that maybe there wasn't somebody else there at the time. But the reason this was shown as the Wilkins Cemetery, which was not the one out on the Tobin Flats Road, was because in 1940, a family by the name of Wilkins rented the little house that garden patch. So this is why it's so hard to find anything. And of course the other one, up on the Tobin Flats Road, we call the Wilkins Farm Cemetery, thinking that was really it. It turns out the family by the name of Wilkins did own the farm here. So we've left it as, we have 2 of them with the same name. Now, the Lockhead Cemetery that Larston's mentioned before, we climbed up there and searched. Mrs. Worth had done it many years ago and had found about 3 stones. In our searching, we turned up 2 more, and then Larston went with somebody, and together the pieces of another one that we made. And
I feel that cemetery has been really missing some of the stone moved.
That's a huge cemetery. There must have been a lot more.
There are a lot of stones with no names on them, and I'm quite sure that when I was a small child and went to school down there, we used to go up there and play cowboys and Indians and marble stones. But I haven't been able to locate them yet.
now that I think I've gotten to an almost finishing point, which I know is true, I find an awful lot of our early, I should say newer, they feel like they're mine now that names go around. They're more probably. Some of the earliest settlers and revolutionary pensioners that I can't find that were still living here in that night, and I'm sure died here because their live stones in here. They better be somewhere. And you'd almost think the Lockheads are so large next to the Sweden House there, that if that was ever cut over, we could really probe it, that we'd probably find some of our oldest lost people. You know, I had Mark look up the records. We talked about this last year. And what we said to us, we took some action on that.
Well, simply during the March 1975 meeting, it was voted that Mrs. Bubba be contacted as to the availability of land for Carroll Cemetery, which is on her property. A second motion was passed that this society endorsed restoring the cemetery and to empower the Bicentennial Committee to seek help from the town on the project, and also to find guidelines to getting money for it.
So we did vote to do that project.
The entrance to that opposite the place behind the Sweden House, and there was a road that went up there diagonally and went out, boy, right just below that road was the old Bass cider mill. They carried the apples up on top downhill through the mill.
Well,
now that goes right up to where those 3 marble stones. What is the name? No, the other one. Rodberg. Yeah, that just comes right out there to Rodberg. So there is a right. And when I was small too, and I guess up to probably around 1920, there was a hearse, which was quite an elegant thing. Brother Dorothy remembers it, and Frank. and that was kept right with the church. I've never known it to be used, but they told me they had, I guess to Dorothy. Yeah.
Where is it now?
That's what I wish I knew.
Who owned it?
I don't remember, but I can remember seeing it used in funeral.
The house was moved up to this side of the Coas Brook, right out at the White Schoolhouse, and made into a little house where, I can tell you who used to live there, I can't remember. On this side of the Coas Brook, there's the White Schoolhouse.
Right.
Yeah, on this side of the brook.
Who lived in it?
There was a little white building, 100 yards or less from the well road. That's on the left of the road, went up that side of the brook. That was the East Wilton house.
Oh, really?
That was the East Wilton best trick. Those houses wouldn't up there.
Yeah, but before there was a vestry, there was a hearse house.
The nurse house before the vestry.
It was changed in 1914, I believe, to our restaurant. And the use of the restaurant from 1914 to 1958. And then it moved
I know
away.
what happened. But there's a nice looking thing with castles on it, and all glass, and the wheels come under, and the driver set up on the side.
They were sent there, man, and that's got a fire. And they lost all of their, they lost all of their stuff. They had to put it in that house. But the table, they lost all of it.
Well, one of the, we can pursue this because we did take that. I think it'd be a good idea.
Has anyone contacted Grace within a year about that?
No, not that I know of. She could be lucky. Should we contact President Town Hall to see if there's any funds available to do this?
I saw him at the time, and he was going to have it done, and there was some funds available in the summer. And by the time it came May, those funds had disappeared, and he didn't know whether he'd get some schoolboys in the middle of the summer, but we never got anything on it.
Well, would you, again, because they are getting Cedar help, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Why don't you give Frank that job?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Frank will do it. Frank will do it. Good.
He'd be more
Before you're running in there, they gotta know what they're doing. Because you don't pick up the big rock you find at your feet and throw it back on a stone wall, somebody's grave.
You want to realize that's been cut over once or twice, and there are two large flat stones, and I don't know if stones or not, but I'd expect they were. And somebody had a brush fire on top of them, so they kind of all sheltered.
They should have actions not to move any stone. Cut the bushes.
No, that's a yes there. The balls are there. Oh, it's a red balls. Well, on rides from our house, different times, we've driven down past Colby Millis, and I'm intrigued by a little clump of pines that was in the middle of the apple trees. Now, you people might have known what was in there, but you couldn't see anything from the road. And so that one time there in the far back left-hand corner are 3 stones, Gideon Powers and 2 Wobbles. I've since found out he's a captain in the New Hampshire militia. He had that home before Nathan Miller did, which must be some relative of Colby, huh? Nathan Miller, his father.
Put some flag on that for 20 years.
Good, I didn't know who was doing that, because I've talked to the American Legion, and he didn't know who was putting the flags on or where. So, and then I talked to Cliff Noyes, and he told me he put some of the flags on, but the list is in his mind. I know, I guess so there wasn't any list to go by. So the different stones, like Thomas Nutting, I had no idea, except for the woman, well, somebody comes here, and I think they come from Jay, and they put it on every year. This is all she could tell me. So this time I said, when he comes, will you go out and find his name? You know, because it ought to be more of a corporate, it seems to me. I'm still an idealist, unfortunately.
If you're interested in that, there's a stone in the Wells area that isn't marked. That is, I guess there's a marker, but they don't have any flag on it.
Well, up in the Lockhead Cemetery, the flag was in the wrong, and the older flag, well, it's because the flag had broken off in the standard. The old flag was behind the grave, buried in the mud. The new one had been put in the wrong place because you couldn't get the broken piece out, and I fixed that. But it's so easy like in the East area, if they're going to mow it, then they just move it to make it convenient. And it's right next to the wrong stone. And this all right. Well, so this is one of the problems. I mean, you find your flags and you think you've got your man, and it's no, you can't find anybody that goes with you. Now, we didn't know where the Dan Knoll Cemetery was, but Don Donald tried to explain it to us. It took us about 1 hour to find it. But now we've got it well marked, and I counted the number of steps from the huge piles of stone at the end of the field back in the country. Now, that was when our little boy David finally caught the enthusiasm for cemeteries. We looked for over an hour. We walked seals up in there, back around, so you know, he had told me that it was near a clump of white birch. Now, when? What a clump of white birch? You know, I mean, they might have been all cut down. But anyway, I finally found it, and I let out a yell. We had both children on our backs. And when David saw that cemetery, he started yelling, and I'm sure they all turned right over. He has been so excited. Now, whenever we drive by in his house, we ought to go in there, Mommy. So I think we've got another historian coming. So now we're putting all the stones. Larston had mentioned to me in 1803 there were 4 cemeteries that were laid out originally, and that one might be on the Evan Eaton property. He knew where it was, so I didn't have to go hunting to find out where he had his property originally in town. And that led to a talk with Don McKean, who told me that one knew where a Revolutionary War veteran who was buried across from his new home. So I called Warren, talked to him. He said when he was a boy, walking down across from his new home, it used to be owned by a Don Brown in 1940. On the AR list, they say Brown Farm, Wilton, and Moses Averill buried there. So he took us over there. He said his own father, the cemetery was there, until he showed it to him. And he took us down one day, and there are at least 4 stones, just field stones. They had got a fence around it. It's 1 rod square, more or less, and it's exactly on the line between Wilton and Burnham.
That's on Blanchard Farm.
Blanchard never owned that piece of property that has a cemetery on it, because I had traced the deeds back to 1838, and I'd have to go to Kennebec County to go any further.
I know
That
the Blanchard
cemetery
said,
has
I
always
don't know
been
what
mentioned
it is.
in those deeds. It's 1 rod square burying ground. Was buried in it prior to 1838. It was in the Hillman family at that time. Hillman at that time. So I haven't really located Moses Averill, except I expect to see him walking down the street someday. I have so much infinite me, except exactly where he's buried. Now, Bernice Crosby told me last week she'd been told he was buried up behind Marsland Farm. Be quite a piece. Be about 1.5 miles through the woods. Might not have been woods then, might have been pasture. So we would have been out in the back pastures, and we won't probably really ever know. But with it pinpointed as opposed to it can be, the DAR might apply for a stone. And if they do, I really would like to see the stone like in the East Wilton Cemetery, because nobody will ever know and find it back in the woods like that.
Hundreds of feet up of the Rhoda Hill Road, way down.
It's behind the
middle of
apple
woods.
orchard
It's nowhere.
and what would have been the back pasture, the apple orchard.
There's some place.
We have the majority of the veterans are in the cemetery. So this is why we're thinking, right.
Moses Averill cut the lumber and settled the farm boring of it.
This was the original Averill homestead, and then it was sold to Henry Webster.
Because this is the question, why the heck?
So why is he buried way up there when he was down in East Wilton Village when he was 90?
This is the one thing that seems
Because
strange.
all the other veterans' graves are marked either with old stones that are still clear or new government stones. There is a person in Farmington in the DAR, and she has a little slip of paper in with all her papers, and all it says is Moses Avel's in the burying yard at the Brown Farm. And that's all they have. So that's what's going on.
The documentation is pretty thin, that's all there, but everything.
Maybe it was a difference in Brown Farm, some of the Brown, some of the.
Well, actually, Don Brown never owned the piece of property that the cemetery is on. I traced that back. So,
Right nearby.
and I understand that his widow was married to Lee Miller, who had been out of town, so I can't find out if she knows anything hearsay who might be there. Let's see. That led to a walk with Lyle. Yes, everybody knows Lyle Hall. And that's a very interesting house, and he has a cousin. I believe, with their guns, and it was hunting season, and we had the children on our backs.
My biggest
And we found the cemetery way out in the woods. It's much easier to find after you know where it is. I believe you went there on your pilgrimage once, but it would be hard to get there again. But of course, when we went up there, it's quite a mess. But there are probably about 8 graves there. Now, I wondered if perhaps Evan Eaton was there and buried there. No, this is not. It's at the corner of Clinton Savage and Lyle Hall's Lane.
Way off.
Originally the Evan Eaton property around 1803. Then I found right, it's number 11.
On the line.
But I find that Evan Eaton's buried in the East Wilton Cemetery, and the stone is beautiful. And there are other names under it. Family, sometime, has put a new stone there, perhaps knowing that their great-great-grandfather is actually up in the woods where it's not accessible. And that's something I'd like to find out if anybody knows anybody and ask the question to find out. And I have now found that he's a Revolutionary War veteran, never been recognized. So I'm in hopes to get him recognized. So now we've grown from 8 to 16 cemeteries. Then talking to John Donald, he tells me his son's wife's family had a cemetery out where he lives now. And she didn't quite know where it was, but we went out there one day, really hot on cemeteries, and we found 3 that were missing, and we found the 4th one. We walked up over we crawled up over the banking, put the children to sleep in the car. I walked right up to the only big field stone there, and carved on it. It died 1833, an E or an EH. Now, it might be half away from Mrs. Donald's family, or it might be Hiscock, who also owned the property and came to the town. So we have no way of knowing number 6. But that seems to be the only stone they see at this point. It's just scratched on the rock. Just hard to see. And we all know the Quaker cemeteries in Wilton, so we don't have to worry about finding that one.
That's one there is.
And there is one veteran in the East Dixfield, and none in Wilton, Intervale, or the old Wilton one, just out of town. And Lakeview Cemetery that hasn't been recorded in any way, but from what I can tell with a walk of walks and a couple of walks with John, there's no one of that vintage there. I tried to find out the incorporation dates when these cemeteries were started or when they were closed. John Donald has come up with nothing. He doesn't have any. The sexton's records for the Wilton Intervale burned in a house fire years ago. So if there are any people buried there without stones, we have no way of knowing who they were now. Yes, this is what I figured from walking around. I'm in hope sometime to proofread those 2 cemeteries, plus the Academy Corner one, so that they'll be correct. It's books here too. So our veterans have turned out to be 12, and 3 of them never been recognized before: John Cheney, Evan Eaton, and Gideon Powers. Powers has had a flag, but he's never been listed in any of the lists of the area. Gideon Powers, I'm not. All right, I'll cross up for doing that. Yeah. I think I ended up finding that Gideon Powers.
That stone should be fixed.
In 2 pieces.
Colby Miller promised me that his son would clean up the mess in there. You know, I mean, lightning struck, they took down a couple more times. So that's got to be cleaned out.
Cleaned out, right?
It has to be in now. It wouldn't take very long to clean out the rest of it. In the lower right-hand corner, there are 3 fieldstones in a line. It makes me wonder if originally, for some reason, the 3 stones in the upper left were down there and were moved out of the way for ease of it over or something. But it's, hard to tell, because those 3 stones, the stones are facing right in the wall. You can barely walk between the names of the people and the stone wall. And that's a strange way to have the stones turned. I would have thought they would have been the other direction. I haven't seen any done that way before. They straight into the stone wall. So I almost wonder if they would just put up in the corner, away from the footstones down below. But, and now I've come up with 6 other men who I can't find any burial places for, but I can prove that are Revolutionists. Most of them show up here in the last censuses, and they're in their 80s and 90s. William Hardy, John Flanders, John Wheeler, a Samuel Whitman, or Whiting, a Ziba Whiting, and a Jesse Wood, alias Atwood.
I wouldn't be with them.
No, that's a different one.
A Hardy, Flanders, Wheeler, Whiting, Wood,
Ziba Whiting. No. Now, I've gotten some of my lists from the list that Ruth Adamo had in her booklet of those settlement duties, and just about from everywhere, I would say. One of our original settlers, Josiah Blake, he's buried in Phillips, and Reuben Lowell is buried in Farmington. These other men I just mentioned, I haven't been able to find anyway. I have a lot of about them. I have some of their wives, their children, their military service, but I don't have a burial spot. Their names will show up in the master list that we're doing for the state, which will be kept on file in Oregon. The original card is sort of like this. But only the graves at night will go in this overall search. Let's see.
You haven't John Dixon's one, I found. Have you?
No, but I found today a John Dixon, D-I-X-S-O-N.
No, Dixon, D-I-T-S-O-N.
Right, but always spell their names exactly the same way, and I find that sometimes in copying and transcribing her records, they're wrong. And until I went to that cemetery, looked at it myself in bright daylight, or take eagle eye here, then we might find out it's someone else. There are other family members buried in this group. Dates would be about right to have been old enough to perform settlement duties.
He was born in 1760, and we have children where he owned the view in 1855.
No.
That would make him 90 years old. I believe he's buried now.
Well, if he is, we're not going to, because we've been everywhere.
I don't say we are, but I think he should be included.
Well, I have no military record for him. Good. Give it to me. I haven't come across his name in any military records of any kind. He was probably in Hampshire.
He from Chelmsford, Mass, with Captain John Kinney on the 1777. He stayed up there 1 year and undoubtedly fought it, sir.
Now, maybe you can give me more of the information and I can, search it through some of the other records that we have. Now, just to give you an idea of some of, you can't do any research without a birth or death date. If you have no records anywhere in town and you don't have a cemetery stone, you can't just go to this book of mass soldiers and sailors, which we get the information out of. It doesn't usually give you any age in there. It tells you about when they entered, but who knows how old they would have been when they entered, between 16 and 42. But there are 2 books that list pensioners and bounty. People receive bounty by flag and house here when they're alphabetical. And they do tell what ages they were, what county they lived in. From that, if you know in 35 he was a certain, subtract and get about the birth date for a person. The census reports for the town, some are printed, some are on microfilm. We have this kid in college over here, and he's copied them all off, so we can see about when people either disappeared or left town. And I hope we'll get these all on a list eventually, and we'll get it into the library here so there'll be copies available if anybody wanting to look up these things. This same is also going through all the Kennebec journals from the beginning, and copying up all the obituaries, and from that I'm finding hundreds and hundreds of veterans for Franklin County and for the whole state. So they're all going to be tied together in this project. There was a book, well, not a book, I shouldn't say that. This here is in the library here in town. It's copied from 6 articles in the Maine Farmer in 1807 by John Haven Willard. This is in the Bass family. This was given by the great-great-granddaughter Elizabeth Bass for Christmas, great-great-grandchildren. She had these copied out. And he doesn't pull any punches when he talks about our early settlers. He tells these great. It's very interesting reading, and he mentions many of the early people that I haven't been able to find other places. And where did you find that? This is in the public library, and she let us make copies of it. Yes, sir.
Fascinating. It all really is a flair.
I have a copy too.
It was in 1973.
You get copied on that.
So that's another source that I got information out lists in 1867, the inhabitants that were in town when he first arrived in 1835. So we have a list of the early people.
That same one?
Yeah.
Good.
Best gave this to the Historical Society.
Good.
I think you people know it's taken us a while to find. But in the meantime, we found a few other things.
You got that love book was written by Allen. Have you seen that copy of that?
No, I don't think so. Bill.
I got a copy of it.
on his back.
The King's Woman, when he was about 14, 1793. Tell him all about that. It's all in red here.
There's a complete list of some odd people who lived in Farmington, and he said he knew every one of them. He had a similar list with Chesterville. He knew every one of them, but he that one. But when we showed this to Natalie and Ben,
Right up there.
primary source, they said, went right to that copier and made copies.
Like this right here, to find this and to read about the men I've been searching for, it was like really knowing them personally, because it's a very entertaining way of writing.
We'll see that you get a copy back here of that.
Yeah, I'd love to have a copy. Now, we found that in looking these up, if we had some sort of birth or death date for Ian Farmington, they have the DAR paper index. And this lists information about the man, if anybody's ever joined them. It'll be his birth date, death date, maybe where he was born and where he died, his wife's name. And then from that, you can go to 161 volumes, almost all of them over there, who joined under this man's name, and they have his military record. But you have to have some sort of birth or death date to go. Then you can go back to the Massachusetts Soldier Sales and get his entire history of his military service. You can also send to Washington for 6 or 10 cents a page, I forget what. And you could get all the military records they have on a person's name. And I had thought that maybe at one time, if we didn't get any here, that I might take it one by one and just see if I didn't get too many pages. It might be safe to just see what we could find out about the really people that way. Because I think it's Timothy Blanchard here, who's listed as 5'10" and light complexion. I mean, they get right down to, about it. What I hope to do in the future is look up a few more deeds and see if I can connect any family to this Moses April, who's buried on his homestead where he passed his last days. And get some flags on the men's graves who haven't been recognized before, and maybe get Moses able to put up somewhere. I hope someday to get Lakeview copied. I mean, if we've got 17 cemeteries copied here, I can't go until I get the 18th done. Have you done the old block? You've got a question. Well, this is the last thing.
Get out of this Springer or something. I know I've seen gravestone up there.
We had two delightful afternoons trying to search for this, directions out there, but we didn't come across it.
It's
well, John will tell you
up
about
in
our
there.
little trips.
He has a cabin up there, doesn't he?
I don't know, he was right
There's
up
a hunting camp up there.
Yeah, we were talking to some of them, and they'd never seen anything. We talked quite a few members of that family.
I think we made 3 trips up there before snow hit us, hunting there for the snow.
It's a fascinating place. None of you have ever been on a walk, particularly in the early fall, something like that, up and back of the Henslip house, way up and back off of the road, goes up the bridges there. We go up into that area up there and poke around. It's a fascinating place of leftover cellar holes and
the lathe come up behind us.
since we've been eating with all of our departed townsmen, we might as well talk a little bit about them too. It's interesting that one of them already discussed it. Or can talk about something here. Around the world here, we did put up some rubbings that we've made here and there, mostly right here in Wilton. That one over there, Walter, I tell you, one we're trying to find out about near the Bonnie Woods, the cemetery over in Farmington. A couple of others that are down in the Cotswold area, but they show a little bit different styles of gravestones in existence and so forth. And we'll mention this in passing, but this isn't really going to talk about rubbings or something. That could be a whole reading in itself. This whole business may sound a bit morbid in a way. Basically, it's history and genealogy and so forth, all kind of wrapped up into a rather interesting package, and sort of try to start finding out about these things. You end up being Sherlock Holmes and Mr. Watson and all the rest. Trying to find out who really was whom and were buried and so forth. This whole business, as far as we're concerned, kind of got started. We are members of the Maine Cemetery Association, and we have some brochures, some of their latest newsletter over on the table over there. And I'd love to have you take one of those, see what this outfit is all about. There's a big spread on it in the Lewiston Journal magazine last Saturday. If you happen to dig at the Journal. This organization started a few years ago. Basic idea of trying to preserve the old cemeteries in the state. Basic idea to find out where they are, because many of them are not at all obvious, and to find out and do something about the law as far as the cemetery preservation is concerned, to find out and do something about the law to meet and discuss these sort of things with the sport habit, and to make as much information about the people who are buried in the state of Maine available as possible. And that is a gigantic undertaking. And this is everything the executive been particularly working on, this whole business of a statewide index to everybody who's buried in the state. Now just think about it for a minute. It's bad enough trying to figure out who's buried in Wilton with a sheet like the sheet that has been passed. One sheet to everybody that's been buried in the state of Maine. Now that with a sheet like that, something passed. One sheet to everybody. But this project is working towards creating a file, and right now there are many of these already on deposit at Maine State Library. And they're building this thing up. Eventually, they'll probably have microfilm and so forth. Maine State Library. This project involves copying onto these sheets from any kind of a record that exists, so going out and creating the record. Let's say we chose to go to the cemetery and write down these things, and creating the records in the cemetery and write down these things. And we want to do as we go along. But one thing, of course, what we've been doing is, first thing, as far as Wilton is concerned, looking up books that do exist, listing people who are buried in books that do exist. Wilton, all over Franklin County and some other places. Dorothy Worth, Wilton, all over Franklin County, connected with the journal, and Dorothy Worth has or had a place out at Burnham Pond and so forth. Apparently not on this kind of place. 14 volumes of this over in the Farmington Public Library down in there. She run downstairs.
There's 86 cemeteries in Franklin County that she did.
Public library down in there. She went through, and all in a very short period of time, they went through and copied down everything she could find. Once in a while, she went through, apparently looked in the other direction, and when she found this down in East Wilton, and sometimes the dates didn't quite match on the stone, and sometimes the names were changed. But on the whole, it is a place to start. And the names were changed. Just the bulk of this, just for a small area, basically. A small population, just for this tremendous bulk of this, just for a small area, basically. Every active, or even most of the active cemeteries in Wilton, every exception of the biggest one, Lake are worth cemeteries in Wilton. There are 2 copies of this, one being at Farmington and the other Lake Lost, and are historic, 2 copies of the Society of something like that.
And they don't go out of the library.
Well, it's a special occasion. So if you look at this, they can be used at the library over there. Special occasion, Farmington, whenever they're open, they can be used at the library over there. Gold mine of information, but they're open. Take it with a grain of salt.
You might mention that all the cemeteries here in Wilton and Lakeview have all been done on these index forms, and I would mention that all the cemeteries here in Wilton and Lakeview have all been done on these.
Plus, the idea is eventually you'll bring all the people named Jones who are buried anywhere in the state of Maine all together alphabetically. Or somebody who eventually wants to trace their ancestors, anybody anywhere in the state of Maine, can start there.
And a number of families here in Wilton, they've been pulled together now. I've seen it myself.
Can start there.
And a number of families here in Wilton, they've been pulled together.
Kittery or Elliott the other day or something.
Wife is here and husband's in Kittery.
And it just happened that Kittery or Elliott or something.
Wife is here and husband.
We started out trying to see if we could make sure this was right, and copied down and so forth. We started out trying to, and see if we could. We started out with 9 cemeteries, we thought, and I guess we're up to 8 at the moment. We started out with single stones, we thought. I guess we're up to the 18th one. There's only one person in Maine or where they're forest, but I'm not so sure he knows either. But anyway,
You couldn't find it.
we couldn't find it.
I'm
We're going to
see if
try
I can
again.
find it.
Yeah,
Right.
we're going to try again.
You couldn't find it.
We can, all of these
I can find it.
cemeteries are being plotted
That's a
on the topo maps, and cemeteries are being labeled and so forth as part of this whole project. And problems you run into when you get into this and so forth. You didn't spell their names the same way today or tomorrow, and somebody copied them down wrong and so forth. Didn't really care about spelling the same way today or tomorrow, and somebody copied them down wrong and so forth. Many of the early graveyards consist of knuckle stones. There's really nothing much you can do there. The early graveyards cemetery on knuckle stones. A lot. There's really some of the earliest cemeteries laid out in town are just this type of a cemetery. And some of the earlier cemeteries laid out in town are just this type. The old stones, many of them have the regular stones set up there, maybe with the old stones, yes, and the weeping willows with the broken branches, the urns, and all that, and the weeping willow. These things all different periods, but you find a nice big stone, and with the little stone, different footstone. And at the other end, big stone. This is fine if you expect little footstones in there. Footstone. More and more people don't realize that there is such a thing as a footstone on the graves. And more people, one of our young neighbors up our way, one time when we were mentioning Captain Walker's grave, one of our Elwell's farms up there does have a footstone. It's Captain Walker's grave. It has just the initials of the person whose real stones are in the grave. And the initials of the... He informed us, yes, he knew where Captain Walker's grave was. He also knew that up there, Walker's helper was buried right beside him. Yes, he knew where Captain's kind of thing was. He also knew that up there, helper can buried right beside him. Misconceptions will come up, kind of thing. After all, we're not used to in this day and age. Footstones actually come up with. After all, you go into these places and you look at the lay of the land. You figure there must have been more people in there, there are stones, the lay of the land, so Muscle was really poking around, people in there, there are stones, prod of some sort, and try to poke around in places where they're poking around, and then you might be able to dig and find of some sort, maybe not, places where then you might be able to dig and find. The stones, these here for instance, show much better in certain cases than they do in others. You find stones, these old slate stones, some of the really half decent rubbings here, mostly in slate, old slate stones. But you more and more you find people use marble, not last. You polluted air, people moisture, anything that's not ravage at the time, make a mess of it, air and moisture, anything. Many of these here we took not because they would make a decent rubbing, because they don't. But many because their interest historical, not because a number of reasons. The first rubbing, want to take a rubbing and be interested in the stone, interest historical, and a number of reasons. In some cases, you might be interested in how did this person die, or as Jonas Butterfield from the Red Schoolhouse Cemetery. In some cases, you might be interested in how when at the window I did stand, lightning came, Schoolhouse Cemetery, my breath, I guess, and that, but anyway, and so forth. Anyway, the lightning got, and that explains what happened to him. And there are two here, and one of them is lightning got on the wall here someplace. That explains what happened to him. And there are two here, and one of them is, this one here, H. Willard, it says here, this is from the Innervale Cemetery. This fellow died by injury. This is by being thrown into cars. And this fellow died by at least two here in town, thrown from cars at various places and either run over or hit the head of rails or something happened. Thrown is quite common at various places and either run over or hit the head of rails.
Yeah, that's what we want to do.
That's a term that I think most women's livers would say is not very nice. That's a term sometimes I think Becky just said sometimes we say consort of. But Becky just said quite I think for that period, the wife of the one who remained probably.
She had two.
That period, the wife of.
Yeah, and talk about trying to find information. I've been hunting for her death date for weeks. Yeah, and talk about right there in my front row.
rolled up.
And so now I know why I didn't find her because
Married somebody else.
And so now I know why I didn't find her because her name wasn't. No, that was her maiden name.
Probably
It
her
was
maiden name. Sometimes, of course, it's an interesting thing because of the war they were in, such as Henry Butterfield up here. Sometimes, of course, it's an interesting thing because of the war they were in, such as first child here, he's already female, born in Wilton.
Sarah Butterfield.
Sarah Butterfield, and the first male child in Wilton.
Sarah Butterfield.
And Sarah Butterfield. So, and of course, the design of some of these other
The
branches.
stones are very poor, that's why we took them
So,
down.
and of course, just the design of them.
And the stones are very poor, that's why we refused to rub with further.
Well, the type of paper used is sort of a very tough rice paper, just for that purpose. Orange short type of paper is like that, sort of a tough rice paper available at the association meetings. Orange short and Harmon, places like that would have it. Crayon, and you can see there are different colors. So these are not needed in colors, but usually pretty much crayon uses as primary colors. These are not the only colors, but usually blue is different. Anyway, it's sort of a very extreme crayon. The blue is shaped almost like a cupcake. It's sort of very extreme. After taping on the paper very tightly on the stone, after having tried to brush off the paper very tightly on the stone, after having tried to brush off, then you start going down and rubbing broad strokes with this very broad crayon. If you think it over, if you took some Crayola crayon 5 and 10 with this very broad crayon, if you think it over, just like rubbing a pencil or something over, Crayola crayon 5 and 10, colossal mix. For one very soft, just like rubbing a pencil or something pointed, you would end up something very broad. Colossal mix, almost the size of something like this. Another thing that's pointed. I don't think there's any graphite. Almost the size of something like this.
It won't even know it's on
I
card.
don't think there's any graphite. Yes, very hard.
That's,
It won't
that little baby that I made the rubbing for down East Woodland, that's, that stone I found baby there. I made the brush down East Woodland, brushed it in that tape. Stone I found, I took it there and washed. I took a brush and so brushed it and it wouldn't take for rubbing. But that was a field stone, it was all kind of peeled off on one side. One case of honey, Althea Kinks, Liberal was up here. This one case, honey, Althea afterwards, I was up in about that. This is that for and he took it afterwards. Come to find out. They took one home and he took a the next day it snowed. They had to find out, couldn't take it, had to hide it, so I wouldn't hide it. So they hid it out in the barn, everybody joked about it.
Some people take heavy aluminum foil, make a brush of aluminum foil, and then make a plastic cast, and then spray the aluminum foil, and make a brush and spray paint or foil, and then more or less the cast. And then spray the copy of the tombstone off and try to get something. Yeah, more or less a complete copy of the tombstone off and try to get. Yeah, but anyway, back in this whole business of trying to find people, this whole thing really turned more into a hunt for Revolutionary War. Veterans buried here in Wilton as part of turning more into a hunt for Revolutionary War. Centennial project buried here, Maine Cemetery Association. They are trying to locate all of the Revolutionary War veterans who were buried in Maine, where they are, find out something about them. So all of the Revolutionary War veterans who were buried in Maine, and where they are, find out something about them. Especially starting to include all these places. Some is quite obvious. It says, such as it does, especially starting to include graves all over the place. Some is quite obvious, and it says near Cold, such as it does farm now up there, Grave Cemetery with Indian Powers and 4 Miller's gravestones up in there, stone from the cemetery, Indian Powers. It says 4 gravestones, a soldier up in there, Christ, no, Indian Powers says it's something like this. I mean, sometimes it says Christ, and so often it's not. And then you start following the clues, and sometimes it's cemetery to cemetery.
Tell them about Timothy Blanchard.
You start following the clues. So, cemetery to cemetery.
Tell them about Timothy Blanchard.
We've been finding following, so through anyway, maybe I'll pass these things out here. We don't really have enough of these for every individual, but maybe every family. I'll pass these things out here. We don't really have enough of these. Some maps of, as far as we can tell, where the cemeteries are. What Papa sheet here. These are some maps of, as far as we can tell, where the cemeteries are. Papa sheet. So we can really talking about.
I might mention that started out I was promised for just words for the temple. Now I'm sort of on interesting that started out and I have here a list if anybody wants to look at it. It's still in the process. And I have here a list if anybody wants to look at it. A list of Franklin County veterans that we processed in probably 10 years. I'm glad you knew about it. Originally.
Put a flag on it for 2 years.
I'm glad you knew about it.
Put a flag on it.
We'll kind of go down through some of these cemeteries, some of the experiences we had trying to, we'll kind of go down through some of the cemeteries, some of that sort of experiences we had. Anybody has any information, find out where they are. One reason we're here.
CD call.
Anybody has any information on where they are. So that's one reason we're here.
CD call. Well, some of these things you know, but of course not being in this town, still a native remain. It took me a while to find out. Some of these things you know, but of course Wilton was settled 1789 in Maine. It took me a while to find out. Just to refresh your memory a little bit. Then Park settled Chesterville in 1811. Park incorporated 1803. Probably the Parks. Then Parks went to Chesterville in 1811. And originally, because the whole state was York County. And then 1760, Lincoln County. And 79 was the whole state was York County. And in 1838, 1720, Lincoln County. 3 counties. 79 became Kennebec County. And in 1838, it became Franklin County. So I have 3 counties to hunt records. Probably. I'm not getting out of town yet. In the Revolutionary War, the dates about I'm getting out of town yet too. But DAR in the Revolutionary War, the dates about 1775, yeah, too. Some of those people. But for DAR purposes, if people were men generally had to be between the ages of 16 and 45 years old, including two not incapacitated in any way. Men generally had to be between the ages of 16 and 45, the right age. They went as powder boys, drummers, fighters, some however, a lot of fathers. Young, so until the right age, really go in as powder boys, drummers, fighters, and some went. The first pension went in 1792, but if anybody served 6 months or under, the first pension, no way of check, went in 1792, but if anybody served 6 months or under, after joining MOCA, no way of check, I became interested in this indexing information. I was going to do after joining MOCA. I became interested in this indexing information. I was told about this, so to do just record here at the library. And she hasn't got every cemetery. And we told about this, but some of the most wayward ones she tried to. She hasn't got every cemetery here. It's so many stones, but some of the most wayward ones she tried to find. That particular cemetery I got here, there's so many materials that are in there. Yeah, she has that information. But that particular cemetery, I got my materials in there. I'm not sure when it was exactly. Probably, I think she did it in 59. I'm not 59 exactly.
14.
She did it. She
One
also.
of them is a vital statistic.
When her husband took over the paper, she
One
also
of them
filed
is a
laws. When her husband took over the paper, there were filed laws, and birth, death, or marriage at the beginning happened to be. She put this all. We have a lot of record. It's not anywhere else. In the very beginning, so we have a lot of records. It's not anywhere else. I started out with a DAR list that Matt Butler gave me for Wilton. I started out with a DAR list that Matt Butler gave me 1940. They did a search, and then anybody wants to look at it, listing and veterans in 1940. The names of the search area, what names they went by, they named them for the people's farms. They didn't really find out the names of the cemetery, which made it very interesting. They named them for the people's farms. They were
Most of these cemeteries have 3 or 4 names.
which made it very interesting to try to find the name.
Person who you found. Most of these cemeteries have 3 or 4 names, and then who you talk to, what neighborhood it's in. Person who you found.
Well, in this here, they showed 4 veterans in the cemetery.
What
But
neighborhood?
one of those was really already in the red schoolhouse. Well, in this here, they showed one at the village cemetery, this is worth, but one of those was really already in the red. One at the priest farm, which is now, one at the village cemetery is, this is worth, one at the Dakin, one at the priest farm, turns out to be now Dick and Mary. Brown Neighborhood Cemetery, I've heard, Mayo, one at the Dakin farm, other names, turns out to be, one at the Wilton Brown Neighborhood Cemetery, I've heard called the Mayo Hill Cemetery, you probably know other. At the end of a garden on the one at the Wilkins farm, Walker Hill and Wilton, long time combined, you know where that farm is, at the end of a garden on the Tilton farm, that's the farm, Walker Hill and Wilton. You know where that farm is before you go up down past the farm, way down the
Yeah.
I think they should call it Bonnie Farm. Right. I think probably they should call it Bonnie Farm. 9 veterans when we started, 8 were still in Wilton. Well, so we had a total of 9 veterans when we started, and 8 cemetery by the Adams home, which is now where I found that there were, we had been in the cemetery by the Adams Red School, now where And talking to someone last week, I found out the old stones had been, we bought the home, the old stones were found in the basement of the asked why. And talking to someone last week, I found out the old stones that when they bought the home, the old stones were found in the basement and they asked why they were there. And they said that the stones were set four shapes, some people call me, said they were Graveyard Hill, I think. Except it's, I more or less named Mrs. Worth as heading her book, Graveyard Hill. So that it won't be too confusing. I more or less named Mrs. Worth as heading her boy. Now, so they found Elisha Bass, confusing with adding Mooney, and Jonas Green. So they found Elisha Bass, Josiah Green, that Mrs. Worth had directed, but Jonas Green. At the time, I was hunting for Josiah Green, that Mrs. Worth had directed, but checking the stone, his name was on Jonas. It was a son. We have the list. Originally, yes, it was wrong. On the DNA, it has been updated so many times. Originally, yes, just wrong. So
Josiah was Jonas's
that
son.
has been updated so many times. So the interesting thing about Mr. Green is he had
Josiah was Jonas's son.
And the interesting thing about Mr. Green is he had 19. But that doesn't beat the one family theory Italian son. But that doesn't beat the one family theory Italian son.
Who was that?
Who did you ask about?
One mother, 24 sons. 24 sons. It was back the other day, you had a bad day. 24 sons. So the other time you got a bad day. So sometimes as I'm reading these, I just don't starstruck. So in these are four listed number 9 on the list. Timothy Blanchard, Isaac Butterfield, Jeremiah. There were four listed originally on the list. Timothy Blanchard, Isaac Butterfield, Jeremiah. But I found another one now, Captain John Sheen, Elisha Adams. It turned out he was born in 1763. But I found another one now, Captain John Sheen. Never showed up on any list, and he was born in 1763. He served, as far as I know, he was 17. Never showed up on any list. Serving in the Revolution. So as far as I know, he's never been recognized in his town for serving in the Revolution. Am I right? No.
Oh, sailors quote him as matching from soldiers and sailors would match to quote him as matching from Chelmsford, Mass. To Ticonderoga in 1777. He was not a captain at that time.
I think probably that came. But this is where you have to be so careful and because you're tracting more of a time. You have to have a birth, but this is where you have to be so careful and tracting times. You have to have a birthday because you can't go back
any more originality than you
It was quite common.
regeneration, same name.
Each of them.
Wasn't any more originality than you can.
It was quite common, like if you had 24 children, each of them named their children brothers and sisters. Were wrong on my original list, and I sent checks. All the cemeteries. And some dates that were wrong on my original list, and I sent checks. All the cemetery discrepancies. And that led to finding out with all the stones that every stone listed in East James Cemetery, the discrepancies. So now we proofread every stone down and changed it. I'm working on it. I think I'm. You got a book written yet? I'm working on it. I think I'm working.
Jr.
Yes. See.
Did you ever run across Isaac Butterfield Jr.?
Yes.
By name 11.
And there are two stones. One of these. And there are two stones, one of you can win it down Walker, the Elwell's found, that hopefully were incorrect. Then we moved on to the date in Walker, probably now people might know, but in 1940 I have no idea where someone. Then we moved on to the Dakin Fund. Now probably people might know, but in 1940 I had no idea where someone named this place. So I finally found out that Astor Dakin lived up in the Brownlee. Finally found it one day, just in 1940. And in asking around with great people, we finally found it one day, just by guessing my door. 20 years from now, no one will, because the roads change, things change, and of course, you know, if I describe where it is today, 20 years from now, no one will find it.
He counted 40 cellar holes in the Knolls neighborhood up here. Donald said once on the Weldrow, he counted 40 cellar holes in the Knolls neighborhood up here. On the Weldrow, off the Weldrow.
In 18
The weird way you get your information. Now, some of that lady in Burnham sent me some information telling me that some of the weird way you get your information is a lady in Rumford sent me some information telling me that there was a cemetery on the Orchard Hill Road in Temple. It's turned cemetery she wrote our own Captain Walker. This was
No, you're wrong.
the cemetery she wrote about was Captain Walker's grave, listed as Orchard Hill Road in Temple.
The Orchard Hill Temple is up by the north, and I didn't know about that, but I can take you up there.
Yeah,
This particular case, she was talking
She was talking about
Okay, I didn't know
Captain
about
William
that, but
Walker.
the
She
Orchard
was
is
placed
an
on the
Orchard
wrong
Hill
road in the
Temple.
wrong town, but she had her information. I noticed on her list. And then at that, did not know about the Brown Neighborhood Cemetery at all. But I noticed on her list of some scratched notes that she had, that she listed a Brown Neighborhood Cemetery. Well, seeing being the Brown Neighborhood, I started asking more questions. And we finally found the Brown Neighborhood Cemetery. Then I asked Nat Buck, it seems that 10, 15 years ago, she and her husband went out there and copied all the inscriptions on the stones. So we finally had that written, and we've added it to the stones. I can't tell you. Because I have to all up again.
She wasn't really in her
Beldakin.
Up there is a Colonel Silas Gould. But there are 4 Silas Goulds up there, but we do not the right one. And Clifford Noyes is putting the flag up there. Listed in the 1940 DAR list. At questions about the Wilkins Farm Cemetery, listed in the 1940 DAR list.
Picked up along the way in the process and bought the cotton specs. That brings back. Picked up along the way in the process and bought the cotton specs. That brings back the dye house and run it through and spec dyes. And some of those fabrics look pretty good, and then after the spec dye, it looked kind of dull and drabby looking, but it had to be done to cover those white specks up involved in there. So I left out the personality.